So I this is like the last video in my like turning 25 collection. And this was like I loved this experience of like making art. I remember just like walking to Late Merritt one day and just thinking like, okay, I'm gonna make art. Like I haven't made a cohesive collection of pieces um in a while, I think since maybe 4 years ago. And so I really want to push myself to like examine where I'm at now and where I'm going. And so much just like flowed out as I was like doing this. Like I only had one initial piece, and like just as things happened, as like I re-examined my feelings, I was like, oh, there's so many aspects of my life that I want to tackle, such as like my career, um, my relationship, my self-esteem. And as I was trying to conclude everything, as I was trying to write a draft, just touching upon everything, I just like hated all the drafts. Like for being someone who is so verbose about my art, I was just like everything I'm saying about this stuff is falling so flat. And I think that was because I was trying so hard to focus about like, oh, like where am I going? And the point of this collection is kind of like I don't know where I'm going. I don't really know what I'm doing. And so like that lends itself to being like, oh, all the writing was also just very vague and like really unsure. And I was just like, sure, that is like how I'm feeling, but it's not in any way like satisfactory or really interesting because everyone is unsure. And so I thought instead of like writing so much about the future and looking towards the future, maybe instead I can look towards my past and draw parallels between where I've been and where I'm at now. And so I wrote this like long story about a specific night I had as a student in Berkeley, and I'm kind of hoping that memory will kind of serve as like inspiration to be a little more like brave and courageous about how I'm leading my life in the future. And so, without further ado, this is an excerpt of that story. The mining building featured three identical arches at the entrance. Two giant windows sandwiched a door of equally impressive height. The curves of the arches were well defined as little rectangular panes of glass created a border of warm light. It was stunning in the silence of the night, drawing attention like a holy site beckoning devotees to the haven inside. The student tried the door. Locked. The best he could do was whip out his phone for a few more pictures. He focused on the glimmer of light seeping out of the cracks between the doors. He stopped. The grandness was arresting, commanding even. The student was finally compelled to confront what had been festering. Being single for so long had been exhausting. It had become clearly the milestone by which everything was measured as each passing year deemed a failure. Worse, it was the eve of that dreaded day, his birthday. He was hours away from turning 21, the last big milestone birthday that had any impactful consequences. He always thought it would have been easier. Wasn't love the reward for the trauma of coming out? Well, that happened over 8 years ago, and there had long been no harvest to sow. Maybe the land was infertile, but really, as always, he had felt like he was the one lacking. The dangerous position of having no self-confidence, yet wielding demanding standards of others, perpetuated the cycle. It's not like he didn't have options. There was always someone, an underclassman who probably wanted to latch onto the first gay person they met, other horny gays doing what horny gays did best, be horny and gay. But he wanted things to be on his terms and his schedule. Settling or venturing out too far seemed preposterous, yet finding someone felt so impossible. In a way, it wasn't really a wonder why those almost 21 years had turned out the way they did. The day that always conjured up the most extreme anxieties and insecurities was finally approaching. And what did he have to show? A few amateur photos of university architecture, a sleep schedule screaming for solace. Well, this time he wasn't really sure what he had to show. Previous years were easy. Failure. No boyfriend, no fun distractions like a playful crush, not a glimpse of requited love. But the usual bleakness that was so freely available seemed to be at bay. Instead, the student was in a conundrum. Just 72 hours ago, he met up with someone, and it felt different. It was so noticeably different. What was normally an intense sense of dread was replaced by such ease. The small cafe in Oakland with its pastries, coffee, and triangular shelves that echoed the mountains of Argentina felt so joyful, even though the student did not order anything because that felt too financially irresponsible. It's not like this initial encounter was the first conversation, though. The two young men had started conversing since last November. Dialogue peppered across multiple platforms went back and forth until our student finally asked to meet up. Was that the difference? Did the digital rapport actualize so that witty responses could translate into audible laughs and visible smiles? The details are fuzzy, but the sense remained. The whole day had felt so easy. What could have simply ended outside the cafe's exit turned into an outing at Target, a boba order, and a conversation in front of the parking lot of an outdoor shopping plaza. It all just kept happening, and the student could just be himself. He was even able to bring up a subject of social suicide, disliking pets. It all just seeped out of him. Talking to someone new finally felt so familiar, but this was all so insane. Now, standing at the perimeter of the glorious mining hall, what was he to do? The only sure thing to follow something refreshingly novel was torrential anxiety. It was just a hangout. How was one to assess the likelihood of mutual attraction? Was it worth pursuing something that took so many months to set up? These reasonable worries swirled, but they distracted from the truly sleep-depriving issue. It was 3:29 a.m. on a Monday that had class beckoning just a few hours away. Little petty worries weren't going to be at fault for the intense upcoming exhaustion. No, it was an issue of identity. Being single was so natural and so accepted, even though it was equally loathed. The purity attached had become a personal badge of honor, not because experience was inherently frowned upon, but because the conviction was to be admired. To wait so long meant a commitment to something real. The intention was that the first should be magical, to be so sure. It was a naivete that clung onto the comfort of singlehood because it foolishly thought that something new could poison the waters. But those waters had created an ecosystem that was so vast and wondrous and lonely. But the student had to come to grips with, was this impenetrable defense worth it anymore? Was it worth relinquishing the power to be self-contained for this random guy? The student looked at the stars, the buildings, the whole world for a sign. Anything. Just a little confirmation or reassurance that this was the time to be bold. Standing in front of the glowing hall, the student finally just asked the universe what to do. He listened carefully, his whole body tense, but splayed open for a response with every limb outstretched. He breathed out slowly, his exhale slinking out of his nostrils as to not perturb a possible response in the flow around him. He waited for words of wisdom, waited for a cautionary omen, waited for truly divine intervention. Nothing seemed to be coming, and nothing came. Truly, the world seemed to proceed with apathy towards his questions or concerns. The universe couldn't answer him. Even if it had the ability to, the effort would have been made in vain, because both parties knew that the student had to decide. The itch begged resolution, and sleep would escape until a decision was made. Maybe it was time to accept that he had been too guarded. Maybe losing what he clung to so desperately could allow for something new. So he made his choice. He'd do it. This was the one. With less than 6 hours of in-person interaction, he decided now was the time to change. I picked Jasper in that moment. The rest of the night proceeded the same as it had started. The student made his way past some stray foliage, the beautiful business school, and other less pampered structures for majors with less obvious monetary gains. Finally, a few blocks away from the student's apartment, a sign came into focus. A neon sign above a coffee shop and bookstore spelled out open in sunny yellow. This wasn't divination, but the message was clear despite being in cursive. The disorientation of sleep deprivation and existential crises had culminated in the soft, radiant glow of a willingness to try again, and for the very first time.